My name's Victor Olliver. I'm the editor of the Astrological Journal, which is published by the Astrological Association. I like to think it's the flagship magazine. I'm also a consultant astrologer, and I'm a media astrologer too, which doesn't make me hugely popular with a lot of astrologers, but I write for the Lady magazine. I've got two columns. I write for humans and I write for pets. The pets bit is a new one. But of course, there is an astrology for animals, but you just have to put it across slightly differently.
So how long have you been an astrologer for?
I came to astrology quite late, but I only got my diploma in 2012, and I've only really been practicing about 4 or 5 years, because I got the editorship at an insanely short period after I sort of got my diploma. So you could say let's say I've been an astrologer for 5 or 6 years.
How did you get into it?
As a kid, I loved ancient mythology, things like that. And then I suppose my big step forward was thanks to Russell Grant. This will also endear me to the more serious astrologers. I bought his Astro kit. And you can actually do these simplified horoscopes, and then you write all the bits and pieces on the horoscope and then wipe them off afterwards. And I was doing celebrity interviews at one point, and I would do their charts and take the charts to the celebrity. And Joan Collins loved it. I name dropped too. We share the same birthday, May 23rd. And but I got caught up by Lauren Bacall because I did her chart. But what I didn't realize at the time, pre-Mayo School, was that his charts, his astrology was based on British births, you see. So I got it all wrong for Lauren Bacall. And my inadvertent story was that she knew her horoscope inside out because she corrected me all the way. What a great story.
How embarrassing it must have been to be corrected by Lauren Bacall.
I only had 20 minutes, and she came as sharp and acid as her reputation has followed her before her passing, of course. But actually, it was thanks to another astrologer that I got into astrology. It was a woman called Henrietta Llewellyn Davis. We had a bit of a relationship, and she used to work for TV Times, Cosmopolitan, things like that. And she said, you know, carry on, you know, do the certificate, blah, 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 blah. So one thing led to another, and I was made redundant from my last job at the Daily Mail General Trust. And that gave me enough money to study astrology full time, because I really wanted to change course and do something worthwhile.
What do you like about the life of an astrologer?
Well, first of all, there's the non-astrological thing that I'm actually working for myself. You know, I've always worked for myself on and off, to be honest with you. But it is fascinating to do what I do, which is to edit a magazine, see clients, and then I'm dealing with other people besides on astrological questions. I could say to you that it's all the joy of helping people, but actually it's pure nosiness. I'm very curious to know about people, and the less I know about them, I mean, I'll come back to this perhaps with your questions, but the less I know about them, the better, because my curiosity is the extent to which the chart tells me things that I ought not to know. So there's that slightly magical, nosy, indecent curiosity sort of thing, which is not the right answer, and Roy Gillett won't approve.
Would you say that your specialization is media astrology, or do you have any additional ones as well?
I think the media astrology works because I'm a wordsmith. You know, I think very fast, I write fast, and I have a ready wit. You know, I could be described as a bit facile. I'm possessed of a self-deprecatory nature. But of course, when you're doing natal astrology or mundane astrology, it's a specialism. And you're applying different techniques all across the way, and it's a completely different level. So yes, I think I'm a pretty good media astrologer in terms of providing something that has a nugget of truth in it and is entertaining. But natal astrology is another matter altogether, when you have to go to another level with people. And that also intrigues me. Because it needs a kind of remote intimacy.
Yeah.
You know, why should you know all these things?
How did you get into it anyway?
Well, it's all down to Boris Johnson's sister. I won't go into this too much, but I had an alter ego called Madame Arkady. It was a rather notorious blog that got me into a bit of trouble now and then. But one person fell in love with Madame Arkady. She was like a media witch, you know, but it was me. And Rachel Johnson, who was then the editor of The Lady, fell in love with Madame Arkady. It was almost indecent. It was almost like stalking. And when she realized that there was this strange little man behind the whole thing, she said, oh, I want you to write to The Lady. And she said, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I don't see myself going into country gardens or writing about strawberries. But I think what you do need is a horoscope column. And one thing led to another from there. And I did the first thing rather like a comedy thing, and she loved it. But then after that, she got semi-serious stuff. She said, well, when am I going to have the comedy? And I said, look, astrology's got hard enough time as it is. You'll find that your readers will be looking for a nugget of contact with their lives. And it's worked out. I mean, it's the most popular element in the magazine.
Oh, wow.
That's what I'm told.
That's fantastic.
But maybe they say that to all the columnists.
I believe you have published a few books. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Well, I've only been in astrology for 5 minutes, but I did write 3 life surfing books, which were deeply superficial, and yet they sold quite well, actually. And they were just annual horoscope things. And that's all I've ever done on that side. It is my plan to write a more serious astrology book in the future. I've not quite decided on the theme yet. But there's another part of me that wants to do a series of celebrity profiles too, but in a slightly different way, which I'm not going to talk about at this stage. But I do firmly believe that the great challenge with astrology is to keep the truth, but also to entertain. Otherwise, people just think you're a geek and they switch off, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you see clients.
Well, I see. I receive applications. I don't actually see my clients. I have given Skype readings where they sort of really asked for some direct answers and they need the answers straight away. But I prefer to do written reports. And I know this goes against my education at the Mayo, it goes against all received wisdom, but I actually discourage clients from telling me anything about themselves.
Right.
They will, of course, ask questions, and that tells me something. They may say, oh, my marriage, or my business, or whatever, my cat. You know, but the thing is, I don't want to know about their circumstances because the fact is, the chart does not tell you their personal circumstances. It tells you about trends, it tells you about challenges. It's an abstract symbolic map. And what I try to encourage clients to do is to apply the report to their lives as an act of will, free will. It's for them to decide whether it applies or not. I think if you get into an encounter, which I realize is very fashionable, I mean, there'll be astropsychologists out there tutting like crazy, but I don't really want to have that one-to-one encounter if I can. But I have been told that that may be because I'm emotionally cold, that I tend to distance people. So it's very interesting about this business of astrology, the extent to which your own personality draws people similar to yourself or to your needs. So that it does, even at my level, it's a kind of encounter, but at a distance. And I have found that with the sort of clients that like what I do, is that they don't want me to micro foretell.
Right.
They don't want me to map it all out like a checklist. What they want is a general guide with some particulars, dates and things like that. But they don't want me to manage their lives. Whereas you will find some clients that want that. And there are astrologers that will do it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not for me.
How do you prepare for readings?
Quite a lot of work. The first thing, and this I give this to you for nothing, always check the birth date, because it's amazing how people get it wrong. And it's amazing how some people don't fully realize that the birth date has to be accurate. But sometimes you get people who lose a year, or you know, they tap the wrong key when they. So I always ask for confirmation of details. Then, of course, I do the chart work. That's quite a lot of work, by the way. If you think that the fee pays me for the work that I do, think again. And then once I've mapped out in note form what I want to do, I then do the report or prepare a script if I'm doing a Skype reading. I say a script, it's more like kind of reminders, a mug sheet sort of thing, you know, to remind me of the things that I want to say.
What tools and techniques do you use?
Well, there's quite a range of techniques, and it rather depends on what's required. I mean, it could be electional astrology. I notice that solar returns are very popular. It actually it supports what I've just told you, that the solar return is a fantastic map of the next year. And it can be quite interesting on the time side too. And with the help of solar arc directions, if you've got the precise clock time, it's amazing about directions, what they can tell you. Although you've got to be very careful that you're looking at the hard aspects and things like that. So synastry is the big thing with me, and quite a lot of electional astrology too.
What kind of elections?
The one that sticks in my mind, because it was quite colourful, was a nightclub owner asked me, they were launching a nightclub in London, in East London, and they wanted the precise moment to launch the club to the minute. And it was easy to do it. I mean, I looked at the Venus and Saturn and all the rest of it, and where's the moon and all that. And it was a fairly easy thing to do. The only problem was, would they stick to it, you see, because they weren't entirely in control of the schedule. There was they were waiting for celebrities to turn up and things like that. So, and I said to them, well, you've got to decide in advance what you mean by launching the club.
Right.
And if to you it is the launch, then for heaven's sake, do it on the minute. And it's going very, I mean, I'm not taking credit for it. I'm not on a take here. I'm not getting any extra money. But it's a successful club. And it's lovely when clients come back to say it, because I think that maybe because of the type of person I attract, they're quite independent-minded, and they're not going to part with their money lightly. And so if they come back and say, well, I'm quite amazed that that happened, you know, the career thing did go that way. And of course, if you are looking at the abstract of the horoscope, it is amazing how accurate it can be if you've got the correct birth details. But I'll tell you something else which is interesting to me. I find that the solar scope, that's the sun sign chart, can be as equally accurate. And I often use the sun sign chart where somebody is not very clear about when they were born. You know, like in terms of which day, things like that. And I find that the solar scope can work, because I believe in it, you see. I made a very interesting discovery recently. I mean, my chart is fairly descriptive, but I've got into draconic astrology, all about the North Node. And that describes, almost with embarrassing accuracy, the way my life has unfolded. It's extraordinary. And the draconic chart, I do recommend draconic astrology, because it sometimes reveals either the soul intent or the spiritual purpose, the thing that you're lumped with, could be another way of putting it, but it is the special purpose that you're here for. And I'm not into reincarnation or past lives or anything like that, but I must say that draconic astrology intrigues me no end.
I might have to have a look then. In terms of books, is there any book that has really struck you this year?
Well, it's Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology. Now, it's a book that you could kill with. If you drop that book on an ant's nest, you would wipe it out. And if you've got osteoporosis, get yourself a splint. It's heavy. It's a fantastic book. I happen to be obsessed with ancient Roman history. It's about ancient Greco-Roman astrology. And of course, what's fantastic about it is that it's recovered techniques, like zodiacal releasing, which sort of, there's only one source for zodiacal releasing. If it wasn't for the source, we wouldn't know about it. But it basically breaks your life up into chapters, a bit like perfection, things like that. But this is a fantastic book, and I don't follow it all, I will admit. And so I really recommend this, because you see a great deal of what passes for modern astrology can be sourced to Hellenistic astrology. I mean, we talk about modern astrology, we talk about traditional astrology. We forget that modern astrology came from traditional astrology. It's dark, I think, to have these sharp demarcation lines. But this is the book that I recommend.
Excellent. Chris will be happy.
Which books impressed me? Now, Frank Clifford. Now, Frank, are you listening? Love you, Frank. I really do. And these are his 3 books. Now, what I love about Frank is that he's very learned. He's been an astrologer for longer than he's been on Earth. Can you work that one out? Because he claims to have been an astrologer for about 30 years. But he only looks about 31. But his book on the midheaven, solar arc directions, and then a book of essays on various different stuff. You see, what he does, he combines great learning with humour, wit, and gossip. This is what we need. And he's a great name dropper. He knows all the celebrities. We both know Molly Parkin. But I really, to students and to practitioners, I really recommend these books. Christine Skinner's
Oh,
book.
right.
You know, it's all about astrocycles. And
Yeah.
you know, if anyone ever has any doubts about astrology, read about astrocycles and stock markets. It's fantastic. I'm getting very much interested into fashion as an indicator of astrology too. In fact, I'm starting a column next year in the Astrological Journal. Because fashion too, rather like the stock market, is a very, very sensitive register of moods, cultural swings, and astrology, of course, can be a measure of all that, if you know how to apply it, of course. By Rebecca Hirsch, it's called Charting the Soul. You can't read it because it's all mirror, I know. But what it does, it combines astrology with psychology and clairvoyance intuition. So you've got everything, spiritualism, psychology. It's a book to offend everybody.
Is there an investment in astrology, any kind of astrological purchase that you've made recently that you want to tell us about?
I bought the new Mastro software. I don't know whether you know about Mastro, but it's the next big thing, I think. And what it is, it's a Canadian source software program which claims to apply artificial intelligence to what we do. Now, if you follow through that to its logical conclusion, you and I are out of a job.
Yes.
But it is interesting what he's done very quickly. And this is not part of the question, but I'll explain it. He's taken a load of words like mourning or happiness. He's put a value on them and then applied them to planets. And he can then make a calculation about when there is a likelihood of something happening based on those words and values. Now, that explanation tells you nothing, but it does tell you that it's a different approach to computer software programming. So I'm checking that out at the moment. I hope to review it maybe in a later issue of the magazine. That's a big thing. Also, I just bought Barbara Dunn's book about horary astrology. Horary Re-Examined by Barbara Dunn.
Okay.
And it cost me £25. I'm quite used to getting freebies, you see, but I decided to buy this. Because I thought it was time that I got a better understanding of certain traditional techniques. But then I'm also reading Hellenistic astrology, which is another variation on that. I think what you can do is pick and mix. I mean, Chris Brennan, I interviewed him and I said to him, are you now a kind of Hellenistic champion and you think modernists are superficial twits and all that? And he said, absolutely not, because he's versed in modern astrology himself. So what he's doing is he's picking and mixing. He's using certain techniques from the Hellenistic period, certain from the medieval, certain modern techniques. I mean, I think for me, one of the odd notions is this idea that we should ignore the outer planet or ignore the... I mean, the more that our actual literal mind expands in our knowledge, it seems crazy to me that we're hanging on to 17th century notions of the sky. Sorry about that, Sharon Knight. I do love you. But there are people who will disagree. And that's a great thing about astrology. You can have a robust debate about these things. But I think once a modernist, always a modernist.
Is there a 13th sign then?
Deborah Halding has written the best essay on that. I do recommend Deborah Halding's essay on the origins of the zodiac and the ecliptic and why constellations are not sun signs.
Do you have any tips for budding astrologers, or perhaps would you like to mention any pitfalls that they should be avoiding, if possible?
Oh, God. No. Well, first of all, welcome. That's all I can say to you. I mean, the biggest pitfall, particularly in Britain, is, are you going to make enough money? So have you got a plan B? And I sometimes wonder whether astrology is the plan B for a lot of people. I mean, I did it the long way around. I took the scenic route. I did the career in journalism. I'm still in journalism, but I'm now using my skills derived from that to, shall we say, be the communicator. I'm a Gemini with Aquarius rising. You would expect me to be garrulous, to communicate, to want to make a connection with people, and to scatter my energies all over it. But I am, you know, capable of focusing. But I suppose the biggest pitfall that can happen is that you start to think as you're learning that your technique or your tradition is better than all those other traditions and techniques. And one of the shocking things I've discovered in my role as editor is just how chauvinistic people can be about their particular thing and how they're better than you. And you see this played out on Facebook and in other social media too. where people will argue, how can you say this? You know, it's not meant to be like that. Venus is not supposed to be, I mean, in other words, you're getting arguments about whether a technique is right or wrong, and that's silly. I mean, if you've learned a certain technique, you've not just picked it up, you've learned it, and you are applying yourself to that technique, and you should respect the fact. So the problem is if you end up thinking, I'm better than you, which I suppose you could say is a general risk in any walk of life.
Where do you see astrology going?
If we remember that astrology is thousands of years old, and that Professor Brian Cox is only in his 40s, there's your answer. Long after he's forgotten, there'll be people like you and me talking about astrology. Now, the great thing about astrology, it's one of the great shapeshifters too. Look at the way it's adapted to psychology. Look at the way in the past it's adapted to other philosophies and approaches. Look what's happening now with social media. Look what's happened with technology, computer technology. It's speeded up the process. It's bringing in more people who otherwise might not practice or learn astrology because they're not mathematicians. We've cut round that problem. The Luddites can go to hell. You know, the computer does the work. There's no harm in it because it's getting you to a certain destination very quickly where you can apply. There comes a point where you have to apply some instinct or whatever energy you want to call it. It's not just an intellectual exercise. So I see astrology, it may never be up there with economics. I think we would have to have that, you know, another phrase that drives me around the bend, apart from the word eclipse, is paradigm shift. If you want to annoy me, talk about paradigm shifts, but you'd have to have a pretty big paradigm shift. And you might, you know, a lot of people are predicting with the grand conjunction in 2020, when Jupiter and Saturn conjoin exactly in air after about 200 years in Earth. You know, there's this sense that because of air, you know, associated with the skies, that this may mark a slow change in attitude. But it is interesting. If you talk to Frank Clifford, he'll talk to you about how he talks to bankers and people like that, you know. So if through computing and through more sophisticated calculation, we can fit into existing, shall we say, linear ways of thinking, I think astrology could grow and grow. But always the big problem with astrology is its pluralism, is that you've got a multiplicity of approaches. And unfortunately, a lot of people who think they know what they're talking about and don't.
So what is the importance of astrology in your opinion?
I think there's a spiritual component to it, because anything that causes you to reflect on why you do what you do and where you are, and reflects on your dealings with other people, I think comes under that little generic thing we call spiritual. It doesn't necessarily have to be religious or mystical or anything like that, although I think there is a mystical component to astrology, my personal belief. But its true purpose, I think, is to remind us that we are not going to be turning into robots anytime soon. And you know why? Because we cannot explain why astrology should work. There are plenty of theories. We can talk about gravitational influences. We can talk about correspondences. But what you can't explain is the causation between the so-called stars and life on Earth. The mystery of that is you can't put it into a computer. I mean, the Mastro thing is a good attempt. But even the guy that invented Mastro says, you know, we may get it wrong because in hindsight, everything looks determined, decided, fated. But when you're looking into the future, it's a speculation. It's a very informed speculation if you're a good astrologer. So I think what astrology helps to do, along with a lot of other practices and disciplines, is to remind us that our lives are so much bigger than what we're doing today, what so-and-so says or tells you what to think, some politician in Washington telling you what to think. And what we can see, it's a wonderful self-liberating thing when you can look at somebody or a situation and apply a whole different way of reasoning it, understanding it, and even kind of calculating where it's heading.
Beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to see change in the world of astrology?
How long have we got? I think when I first became editor of the journal, there was a hell of a row because I brought in some sun sign astrology, and I ran a column by Jessica Adams championing sun sign astrology. There's a hell of a row. And it's quite funny. There's one astrologer in particular who reproached me and said, oh, the shame of it. And Dennis Elwell, I don't know whether you know Dennis Elwell, he's one of the great thinkers of astrology. And he was a fantastic writer, and he did come up with wonderful insights. But he also became famous for being rude about media astrologers. He thought they should always strut up. And now I always firmly believe, I wonder if that's really true. So I went through the archives going back to 1959, and then somewhere in the 80s, I think it's in the 80s, there's this fantastic essay all about the solar scope. And the writer of it says, it's a strange thing, but I find the solar scope tells me more about myself in some ways than does the birth chart. And the author of that was Dennis Elwell.
Wow.
So my revenge on my critics was that I reran it. I think the point I'm saying here is that if you're dealing with the public, you have to simplify. And I don't think you're cheapening astrology to do that. I mean, I've had these conversations with that wonderful astrologer, Anne Whitaker. We had a wonderful debate on her website, Answers and Questions, or Questions and Answers. You can look it up, Google it. I mean, it's a long, long conversation about the whole thing. And I mean, to give you another example, Brian Cox, when he's doing his Wonders of the Cosmos, Universe, or whatever, the Wonders of Wonders, and looking a bit like God in those book covers, you know, very, you know, an atheist who looks like a god. I find that very interesting. But you see, when he's telling you the size of Jupiter and the temperature of Mercury, that's not astrophysics. It's not particle physics. It's not his expertise. He's just giving you simple astronomy that you can pick up in any old 2-bit astronomy book. He's just dishing it up with a nice smile, and his white pearl is dazzling you with his charm. The point I'm making there is that nobody criticizes him for cheapening science or cheapening physics, you know? So there has to be an interface with the public. And if you maintain that dialogue, even at its most simplistic level, you're doing a favor to astrology, while all the others are doing the research, building up, you know, people like Nicholas Campion are building up a fantastic reputation for astrology in the world of academia. And we could go around the circle of loads of people doing fantastic research work, people like Liz Green, who've explored psychological astrology. We'd be all night going through the list. But there has to be an interface, otherwise the whole thing goes into a Masonic lodge.
I was wondering if you have any projects that you're working on at the moment that you want to tell us about.
The only project that's in my mind at the moment, I mean, I do have some other plans, but the main thing is the 2018 issues of the Astrological Journal. We've got the 60th birthday of the association, the 50th conference in June. I hope people realize it's in June, not September, and it's going to be in Reading, not in Wisboston, or Wisboston, however it's pronounced. So at the moment, I'm planning the issues because we want the issues to be celebratory, to look at the past, to look at the future. I think maybe you may be a little bit involved in this too. And it's going to be fantastic, but this is taking up a lot of my time at the moment. This is the Astrological Journal, people. It's a glossy magazine, and you get it free if you join the Astrological Association.
Excellent plug.
And that cover is for the Grand Conjunction, by the way, if you like it. Okay?
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
Great joy speaking with you.
It's been a real pleasure.